problems are public policies consciously, not inevitably, created for farmers. The Family Farm Development Act includes 11 different titles. I'll just summarize them, and there's more information outside on the tables, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody else about them in greater depth. Well, one of them is to help make the USDA accountable for the rhetoric that it talks about family farmers by seeking to develop a family farm development service within USDA. Our land-grant system has schools with courses, it has research stations, extension agents, which are practically directed by corporate dollars, not taxpayer dollars. The FFDA seeks to reorient these priorities by refocusing on some forgotten words like humus, crop diversification, rotation, and an agricultural system which protects our environment. We want to change the tax codes, which were originally set up to help the family farmer make the tax codes do instead what they were intended to do. We want to provide communities made up of people, not of private corporate interests, access to land in their own areas. We want to provide low interest rate loans for alcohol production and alternative technologies. We want to create marketing alternatives by using, some examples that are in the bill are using locally grown produce and having schools have the opportunity through the School Lunch Act to purchase that local produce. To use local produce to sell to local institutions in our areas, to get USDA and aid to help set up more direct markets. To provide legal services for poor farmers, to establish a food price review board. One of the other areas that's not presently in the bill, which I'd love to really talk about longer, but I won't, is right now we've set up a coalition has set up a democratic and educational decision-making process to enable us to re-include one of the most important sections of the Family Farm Development Act, and that's our price policy position. In order to make such a bill, though, move through Congress, the NFFC began to spread the word, just write everywhere we could, speak where we could, and build up a system first of people around the country who care about the bill, organizers. We have a system of regional coordinators and congressional district contacts. People working in their own communities, working on their local projects, and making an extra commitment to talk about the bill, to write Congress, and to organize at conferences, to talk to more people and focus on federal policies as they're focusing on state policies and so many other projects, and we all find ourselves overworked, but we must. The coalition has produced an organizing packet, and there's samples outside if anybody wants to look at them. We've developed an organizing update that helps us to communicate the different strategies and tactics that organizers that are working with us are doing in their different areas around the country. We know from experience that a national effort means absolutely nothing unless it's based on the organizing efforts of thousands and thousands of people around the country, willing to demand the changes, not waiting for them to happen. I really realized that after being here for 3 days, even more. One section of the Family Farm Development Act, though, was which was originally introduced in February of 1978, was introduced as an amendment to the Agricultural Credit Act of 1978, and it was passed. And that created the Limited Resource Loan Program through the Farmers Home Administration for operating and ownership loans with a low interest rate. What we can see by many of you farmers out there who might have tried to apply for them, and a lot of the work and problems that the Center for Rural Affairs has been dealing with the program, that getting a piece of legislation passed is only the first effort. And seeing that it's implemented so that it meets the needs that it was originally intended for is a continual struggle. And in order to do both, of course, we have to be organized. The FFDA was reintroduced in January by Congressman Nolan of Minnesota, a longtime farm supporter, or a short-time farm supporter, he hasn't been there that long, and Congressman Brown of California. And it's known now as H.R. 6295. It's not yet introduced into the Senate. We are presently encouraging everyone to write to the representatives in the House to co-sponsor the bill. We need to build up a large amount of support. We need to write to our senators and encourage them to introduce the bill and to push for it and let them know that it's important and how it impacts our local communities. We're also working with Congressman Nolan's subcommittee now on family farms and rural development to hold field hearings around the country. They'll probably be held at family farm projects around the country, so Congress and media can focus on so many of the organizing efforts that many of the panelists here have spoken about. If people have suggestions for locations for these hearings, I'd love to hear about it. It's still in the developmental stage. We can take it back to the congressional staff. And of course, we encourage you and everyone to join with us in the National Family Farm Coalition. We're also working with our companion organization, the National Family Farm Education Project. And what we're doing there is to bring together many of the different national organizations and the many public interest areas, issue groups that exist in Washington, D.C. We're trying to explain to them first more about food and farm policies, because before people understand why it's important, can't really act on it. We've held one roundtable in Washington on cheap food policy. It wasn't only attended, though, by policymakers and national organization representatives. We had farmers there. In fact, two of the farmers who are here in the audience today, George and Don, if you want to talk to them about it. And it was held on what a cheap food policy was. And it was really fascinating, some of the results, to hear some of the environmentalists talk to the farmer groups and the farmers talking to some of the consumer groups. Some really important points were raised, and that kind of dialogue has to go on. We've produced a fact sheet on cheap food policy that we hope to really widely distribute. So let us know. We hope to, what we need to do here, because there's so many groups and organizations, is always to sort of tap into our networks, as we spoke about last night, the strategy session, and distribute, as Al said, so much of the already existing information. And we're now planning to work with many of these organizations as a follow-up session to, number one, really examine what the 1981 Farm Bill is and how these different national organizations can plug into it and how they should plug into it, and how the Farm Bill is not only the area of interest of farmers, but of all of us. The Education Project also produces a newsletter called the Family Farm Monitor. Right now it's free because we still have some Community Services Administration money to help us through the first few issues. And we've just sent out a questionnaire to some of our to all of our readers, to ask them, you know, how are we going to support it now, and would people be willing to contribute? Well, I was really impressed not only to hear all of the stories of what people have done, but all of the struggles that people are continuing to do. And all of our work is so important. It used to be that I would always sort of pull out my hair and try and look for the one way that was the most important way to try and make the change that we're all interested in finding and working for. But I realize, of course, that there is no one way, and that we all have to work together from all the different angles to make change. I mean, we're farmers, and we're building alternative models, and we're building markets for our products, and we're writing articles and poetry and history. We're trying to pass legislation, and we're organizing. We're doing this locally, regionally, and nationally. And we must really all work together at all levels, because there is no one magic key. And there's so much to learn from everybody here. And I've just learned so much, really. And I know that we must continue in the footsteps of so many of the people here today, to continue to try and organize locally and nationally, and to bring ourselves together, not only to tighten our network of people here but to really make our circle bigger than we can possibly imagine. And if we can all continue to make a commitment to work with each other and to organize more people, and I find that organize, sometimes that word seems so intimidating. I mean, I think organizing means everything from going home and talking to your sisters and brothers or your neighbor about the issues that are important to you and trying to give them some incentive to just do whatever they think, you know, they can do at whatever level. So to organize in whatever way we can, I think through that organizing, we'll slowly learn how to make changes and eventually then to take the power that's necessary for the survival of a people-controlled food and farm system and of our society as a whole. Thanks.
I know it's late, but I really, Marilyn and other people who put a lot of work into this conference do want at least 10 or 15 minutes for other people here to talk. Come to one of the microphones that's closest to you and talk about what you're up to, or if you have comments to direct to anybody here. Don?
There's one problem that came up in this panel, and I'm glad that it has, because I think we haven't given enough opportunity to discuss this particular question, the question of the small farm versus the large farm. And I want to make clear at the outset that I think what we've got to do is to try to get at the facts and to get at the real problems, because I think we've got some problems with the fact that phantom problems are raised in this area. And so I urge everybody to look at this, and I'm sorry that I don't have with me the facts that I'd like to have that I've got back in the plains on this question. I've got a book, a USDA book that has some information on it, Another Revolution in U.S. Farming by Lyle Schertz and others. And one table in there is a little bit helpful, but it's not as good as the information that I've got at home, and I'm sorry about that. But in 1978, it breaks down farm size as follows: 0 to $20,000 annual gross, 1.9 million farms. And I question these figures because they seem to me to be somewhat more total number of farms than I think there actually are. $20 to $40,000 annual gross, 253,000 farms. 40 to 100,000 annual gross, 390,000 farms. $100 to $200,000 annual gross, 124,000 farms. And over $200,000 annual gross, 63,000 farms, or approximately 4% of the total number of farms in the range of 10 to 200,000 annual gross. So that the total number of farms from 10,000 annual gross to 200,000 and over is 2,672 farms. I'm sorry, 2,600. Wait a minute, that's let me get my head straight here. 2,672,000 farms, which is the total number of farms then in the country. And of that, those with $200,000 gross and above are 4%. Now, I know a dairy farm in my home county run by two brothers. And as you all know, dairy farming is one sector which has the most protected price in agriculture. Federal legislation protects milk price at 80% of parity. So it should be the sector where there's the most assured profitability of any sector in agriculture. They milk about 400 cows, nearly 400 cows. It's a fairly good-sized dairy, in other words. It's not the largest. There are dairies that milk more than that. But it's a good-sized family operation. I've also been involved in building a methane plant, or working with people who are building a methane plant on a family-operated dairy farm. It's a family corporation in Pennsylvania that milks now around 700 cows. I don't have the full figures on that second operation, but it's interesting because of the methane aspect of it, but that's a separate topic. The 400 dairy cow farm produces an annual gross of around $500,000. That seems like a lot of money, I know, to a lot of people who are not in agriculture or who farm on small acreage. But the cost problem in agriculture today is such that that farm this last year lost $100,000. That's just because of the rate of increase in input costs on the farm. I can cite another farm run by a father and son, active in American agriculture movement, 26-year-old son. Many of you may know him if you were in Washington because he brought an alcohol still that he's building up to Washington on a lowboy and demonstrated it on the mall. They farm soybeans, peanuts, and hogs. They're having to get out of peanuts because the peanut support price has been driven so low by the government in relation to costs that it's no longer possible for them to continue. They farm 700 acres, which is an average size farm, particularly in that area of Southside Virginia, and they have an annual gross of about $300,000. They have no hired labor, and they are not overly capital intensive. Most of their equipment is old, and I say if a family of a father and son can operate a farm, make that kind of gross, it's got to be a pretty efficient farm, 2 people. So what I want to bring up is in direct response to the points made by Chuck, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Hasselbrook, in relation to large and small farms. Let's look at the real problems because they are there, and the biggest and most important one is the problem of outside interests acquiring the land, so that they can have to lease the land in order to continue farming and then can amass the control. Let's not fight among ourselves, in other words, about a phantom problem related to farm size. Let's look at the facts squarely and decide what is the most efficient sizes we want, but let's not penalize those people who have struggled to stay in the farming business in response to federal policy that has squeezed margin so that you have to get bigger to produce a volume as margin has declined. And I hope we can look at that one and sort the fact from the fantasy and get to the bottom of it and set policy in the right ways.
Thank you. Please try and keep your comments a little bit shorter because it is getting late and I see a number of restless people who have something to say and we should give everyone a chance. Al, and then after you. Yeah, sure.
Well, I would like to say I agree that federal policy in many forms is what forces farms to get bigger. But in my home community, and I suspect it's true in most of the Corn Belt, the reason people like myself or the non-wealthy can't buy farmland is much less seldom because of large corporate interest than it is because of the largest farmers in the community that are going out and buying everything up. And I don't feel very much in common with very large farmers that are worth $1 million because they're very much what are taking the bulk of agriculture today. And that type of trend is doing very much to squeeze opportunity out of agriculture. The majority of agriculture, at least in terms of hogs and Midwestern crop production, is not in the hands of large corporate interests. There is going to be a lot of investment, and that's a problem. Nonetheless, I don't see that very large family farms is a phantom problem. It's very much a narrowing opportunity for smaller farmers, and it's very much a part in the trend toward fewer farms and more narrow opportunity.
Part of that problem results from the fact that we have these tax and investment credit laws that press also for farmers to profit on the speculative investment on the land rather than on what they can earn. So we need a farm policy. See, we have farmers in the American agriculture movement that are in the category you're talking about and don't want to be as large as they are. And so I want to get to the bottom of the real problem and correct it, and not deny program benefits to these people because they are where they are in the effort to struggle to survive. Let's look at the source of the real problem and recognize that those people, even though they are as big as you say they are, may not be yielding for themselves as much of a wage after all their investment as somebody who's got no more than the value of a lunch bucket invested on a 9-to-5 job. And that, I submit to you, is also a fact of the matter.
Okay. Al?
Last night at our strategy meeting late, Ann Canton was movingly telling us about the plight of her and her husband with their farm up in Minnesota, made a rather curious remark about that they were on Cargill's hit list. And that kind of got my journalistic juices flowing. And the last 24 hours I've been doing a little mucking around here and found out a very interesting story that I think we should know about. We've been talking a lot here about education and means of education, of getting people alerted to what's going on. It seems about 2 weeks ago or so, up in Minneapolis on WCCO television, they did a program called the Feast of the Giants. And being somewhat interested in the program, of having had something to do, a little to do with it, I was immediately phoned the producer up there and was talking with him about it. It seems that the program concentrates on Cargill and Iowa beef processors. The format of the documentary is usually to show the documentary and then at the end have about a half-hour discussion on the show, and they will invite pro and con in to discuss it. So for this program, they brought in Frankie LePay and Rich Gilmore from Washington, and Ann. She was the farm family representative, another individual, I don't know who that was. For the con side, they invited Cargill, Iowa beef processors, International Multi-Foods, and Congressman Tom Foley, chairman of the House Agricultural Committee. Well, it seems that Cargill decided they weren't going to come at all, and they made it very clear from the outset. But in a conversation about 2-3 days before the program was to be aired, Cargill made it rather clear that Foley wasn't going to be there either. Well, as far as the people on the program knew, that he was, and the first they learned that he wasn't going to be on there was from Cargill, which makes for a very interesting scenario, however you want to fill in the blanks. Consequently, when the program went on the air, International Multi-Foods, as I recall, was not there either, and Iowa Beef, who was there and found out that Cargill wasn't going to be there, they turned on their heel and walked out 5 minutes before the program went on the air. So what's happened is that the station is getting an enormous amount of flack from all over. Cargill has already rushed in to print a pamphlet, which they're mailing out to anybody that wants it, to refute the thing. And while I'm not at liberty to go into the details, the pressures are being really applied on the station from some very big agribusiness sponsors in the Northern Plains area of the of the country. Afterwards, out at the table where I've got my things, I'll give you the details. The station will make the film on 3/4-inch video available free to any groups that want to show it. And they also have a transcript of the program for $2, and I have the address if you want to send for that transcript. But I think it's important that we get a hold of the program like that, we show it out to the people, and we give them the scenario of how this program developed. Because as I said yesterday in my remarks, we've got to make the press come to us. We've got to go to the press, pardon me, rather than them waiting for them to come to us. Now here's a station that stuck its neck out, and I think we owe them that support to stand behind them and not only see the program, but then tell the station what we think of the program, because that means an awful lot to them.
Can you also introduce yourselves, in case people don't know you?
Yeah, my name is Isaiah Madison. I'm from Greenville, Mississippi. Stand down here. One thing that hasn't been talked about very much during the 3 days that I've been here has been the situation of the black farmers in the southeastern part of the United States. I work primarily, I'm employed with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, and I work with the National Association of Landowners and Emergency Land Fund. And we're having a situation where black farmers are going, are an extremely endangered species. They're going out of business very, very fast, at a much quicker rate than small farmers are. In 1954, black farmers or farm land in the state of Mississippi, I think it was about 18% of the farmland was in the hand of black farmers. In 1974, that had been reduced to under 6%. It's less than that, of course, now. I work with a lot of guys who farm anywhere from 100, 200, 300 acres, 350, whatever. And we're having experiences right now where they're going into foreclosure, you know, dropping off like flies. It's been a long time since the banks in Mississippi, in my area, dealt with these people, no matter really how solvent they are. The best of them, I mean, there are some very competitive ones who just can't get consideration out of the banks. And they are forced, of course, for the most part, to deal with the Farmers' Own Administration. Some have been able to deal with the Farm Credit Administration. We filed a lawsuit recently against the Farmers' Own Administration challenging the failure to implement the limited resource loan program, and just charging them without now discrimination against these black farmers and the small farmers. And I can understand that the issue, and I'm speaking in part to the question that was raised by Dunn, is not little against big or black against white. But I do think that we have a situation where, insofar as black farmers are concerned and small farmers are concerned, it is a crisis that is much more extreme in terms of their survival than it is insofar as the larger farmers, and of course with respect to blacks, the white farmers. And we are compelled to deal with the pain at the point that it is most intense and the implications for irrational reaction to this pain, which is very real in the state of Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta. That's why we must focus on it. I think often in heightening the contradictions that may not be the source of the problem. We drive one another to get to the source of the problem, the root of the problem. I do feel that many of the people that I work with have been forced to buy additional land or rent additional land in order to just be able to qualify for a loan, to stay in business and remain competitive. And when in actuality, and this is what Don was speaking of with respect to the large farmers, they just don't really want to operate at that level. They don't have the desire or the competency to operate, but they could operate at a much competitively and competently on a smaller scale. I think we're dealing with a question of the right of a farmer to be able to sustain himself through farming, if that's all he wants to do, without being required to be a mass producer in order to feed other people that he may not be interested in feeding. And that's what we have in this country through the financial policies, the forces operating through the market, government policies and political policies, or whatever you have. We have a situation where people just cannot operate at a level that they are capable of operating at. And so you're forced to move to a point that where you're incompetent, like the Peter Principle, and then you go under. So that these kinds of forces, I'm convinced that what we're really talking about ultimately are some very fundamental structural changes in the economics and politics of this country. I'm convinced of that, and if we're not at that level in terms of the policies that we are about implementing, we are just blowing in the wind. I spoke to this, or I attempted to speak to this last night at the strategy meeting. We get 90% parity, 100% parity, or whatever, and we still got a situation where little folks are getting 15 cents and big folks are getting 95, and the big eat up the small. It's like a story that I once made up where there was these creatures in this garden, and they were discovered by his farmer, and they started off, there was one, and he saw that he was eating up his cabbages, so he hit him in the head, and when he hit him in the head, he jumped into 7 creatures, and they started eating up everything, cabbages and cucumbers and tomatoes, melons and everything. It's eating up the whole garden. He looked at them, and the more they ate, they got to the point they ate up everything in the garden, and they started looking at one another, and they started eating up one another, just gobbling and conglomerating one another. And that's what we have in this country, where institutions, corporate economic institutions, are gobbling up one another. We're going to soon end up with one big, monstrous glob. He's going to be left after we've all been consumed. And then he won't have anything to eat up, and he'll die. And I wonder whether, I think that it's going to be necessary for us to try to establish some areas of economic activity where we are not governed by greed, we are not governed by bigness, and these are going to have to be fundamental values, and that those who function according to these values are a part of that order. Those who do not, that they go out and do their thing, eat up one another, and that when they finish off one another, we'll be around to pick up the pieces. And it's sort of akin to what the Nearings were talking about last night. We have to move to a point where we're going to have to choose where we stand. We're going to have to decide at a point of value. Am I here to survive at any price, or am I here to survive with principle? And right now, most of us, and from what I've heard, since I've been here, basically we're just going to survive any price, because I haven't heard anybody here talking about what the policies, the economic policies, the farm policies in this country, the impact that it's having in Latin America and in Africa and Asia. And those are some very real issues and questions that are going to impact upon what it means to have a healthy farm economy in this country. Because if we were talking about health within the context of this country, the economic and industrial health of this country being based and riding and being sustained on the backs of the people in Africa and in South America and in Asia, then I'm not so sure that I'm for such a healthy farm economy. Now I'm going to stop, because I'm going to start talking about something that I feel very strongly about. But I think that we're going to have to look at this thing a lot deeper than the way we're looking at it, and define health in a lot more global sense than the way that I've heard it being defined the last 3 days.
Thank you. Harry?
If I'd like to make a statement on that. That goes back to one thing. The farmer is not being subsidized by the government. The cheap food is what we're producing right now to feed the people overseas. And when the small farmer drops out of sight, be it in the South, be it in the North, you're going to have the big boys come in, and if you think those people are starving over there now, wait till they can't pay for that corporation's price.
China wasn't getting cheap food from the rest of the world for their revolution. She did it by a blockade around herself.
The U.S. is the biggest food importer in the world. The United States imports more food than any other country in the world. Other people.
Yeah, I believe the United States does own more foreign land than any other country. Well,
Carrie?
that can be a very deep discussion, I can say.
Out in the halls at 6:30 over beer.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Cynthia.
We're right now beginning to get to the real issue, Kevin. You know, to quit on this issue right now is a cop-out, friends.
Yeah.
We've got the challenge laid before us. You know?
I've
Where are
been
we gonna take it? Where are we going?
I've been in discussions like this before, and many times we've ended up breaking chairs up. I think we can control ourselves, but that's a very good issue right now. There's so many people controlling us. The way I feel right now, you people aren't free. Every time you bring out that plastic credit card, or you take and dig in your pocket, somebody's got their eye on you. You're controlled. That's fact. That's very true words. I think we got two people wanting.
Could I just make a short comment? Have been some good things said. I'm a farmer from Minnesota. I've only been here just today, so I feel that I've missed a lot of good things. But first of all, I would simply like to say thank you to the people here. I think to be a farmer and to be a lobbyist and to be in the American agricultural movement and to be on tractorcades gets a little scary and a little lonely. And it's been a good feeling here today to know that there are so many people from so many places that really care. I appreciate that. Just one other comment too. I did not hear all of the panel, but I did walk into the room when there was a statement, something like, certainly if we got parity prices or too much money back into agriculture, it would be destructive to agriculture and the family farm system. There is such a long history of injustice, I think, to people on the land. I've been reading Jack Nelson's book. He takes us back to Amos in the Old Testament. And I talked to Jack and I said, if it's been going on that long, how in the world are we ever going to square off with it and get it figured out? I came on that farm in Minnesota in 1952 when we lost the Stegall Amendment, or the security, parity security. And since that point, it has done nothing but go down. If you look at the parity chart, income has gone down. And as income has gone down, so have our young people left the land, so have we become bigger pieces of land. We've been forced to become that bigger farm because the universities and the economists and the extension offices and the USDA have told us that the only way to survive is to get bigger. That jog in parity in 1973 made a difference on the land. Suddenly young people that had migrated into Minneapolis and St. Paul came back and they said, hey, you know, maybe we can make a living on the farm. And we found it precisely the opposite happening, that when there was parity income on the farm, there were more young people ready and willing and able to move into farming. And I think that's one thing that we have to remember. And I know that there are farms that are perhaps too big, but there are legislative ways to deal with that. And I think we have to investigate those. But as Dawn says, we cannot penalize the whole farm industry because we have 4% big farmers. What's happening now is destroying us as families on the land, and that has to stop.
Thank you. Carrie?
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm Carrie Fowler from the National Sharecroppers Fund and the Graham Center in North Carolina. There are proposals now pending in Congress to expand the coverage of plant patenting laws. Those laws, the proposals, if passed, will make it possible for corporations to actually take out patents on new varieties of all food crops. Already those laws, which the main laws were passed in 1970, already those laws have led to an incredible number of takeovers in the seed industry. IT&T now owns Burpee Seed Company. Sandoz, a Swiss-based corporation, owns Northrop King. And recently Ferry Morris was sold to Union Carbide, all petrochemical corporations, which has some interesting implications for the kind of seeds that might be developed in the future. This also has a lot to do with the fact that since 1970, since our plant patenting laws were passed, seeds have been the fastest rising farm input cost. But there's some other important things to be said about plant patenting laws, and some of the scientists are saying them in the scientific journals. They're saying that plant patenting laws lead to genetic uniformity in our food crops, which is threatening the very basis of our agricultural system. The most horrendous example of this comes from Europe, and we're patterning our laws after European laws. In Europe, partially in an attempt to enforce their patenting laws, and partially in an attempt to clear out the traditional varieties from the marketplace so that corporations with their patented varieties can dominate that marketplace, they've established a system of legal and illegal vegetables. They have actually made it illegal to sell and in some cases to grow a number of varieties of vegetables. On June 30th of this year, they'll outlaw over 2,000 varieties of vegetables, including things like the big boy tomato. Fines in England will be up to $800 for violating this law. The United Nations is estimating that within 10 years, 3/4 of all the vegetable varieties now grown in Europe will be extinct. Well, there is some good news, and that is that these proposals were introduced into Congress over a year ago, and that despite the major proponents pushing for this legislation, the major proponents being IT&T Union Carbide and the USDA, they still haven't been able to get the proposals through a House Agriculture Subcommittee. They're going to try again on April the 22nd, and we need your help. We've been sticking our thumb in the dike for a year now, and what we really need at this point, before the 22nd of April, is for organizations and individuals to go on record as opposing these proposals. I and other members of the Sharecroppers Fund will be out in the lobby after this session, and if you're interested in trying to help us, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort, we'll be glad to talk to you about it. Thank you.
I'm Ed Berg from Madison, Wisconsin. One issue that we've not talked much about, but has kind of been sneaking in the door, is the question of land reform. Now, we've talked about parity, and it's many ramifications, but parity alone is by no means sufficient for a healthy agriculture. We also need some kind of systematic land reform to break up excessive holdings in the United States and make it possible for new people to move into agriculture. Now, I think in the cities there are hundreds of thousands and millions of people that would like to be into agriculture, and right now it's virtually impossible to get into it. If you don't inherit the family farm, you're out of luck, and even if you do, that may not be sufficient. There's various ways that we could have a land reform program in the United States, and it needs a lot of careful study to make recommendations about it. The federal government could buy land and lease it back in a regulated way to young people who want to get into farming. There could be a graduated land tax, a property tax. Like we have graduated income tax now, which makes it less profitable to have a high income. We could have a graduated land tax that makes it unprofitable to have a large estate. There are all sorts of restrictions that we could put on foreign corporations that are buying up land with petrodollars and things like that. Many different ways that this could be done. And I think with the increasing price of land now, where it's only rich doctors and big corporations that can afford to buy farms, that this question of land reform is going to become increasingly popular, and one that many of us may be called upon to deal with in the fairly near future.
There any other people? Yeah.
I was struck, and I'm sure everyone here is, and wishes that all the farmers in the United States could be sharing this information and sharing these experiences. All the consumers, everybody, farmers are consumers too, could be sharing these things. And for that reason, I hope that the proceedings of this conference are published widely. The second thing that struck me was this real irony that the major tool, which the most effective means of communicating all this information to people, and the irony is that this tool belongs to us, is not available to us, and that is the broadcasting, the public airwaves. And I hope that, if strategies, when we're talking about major structural changes and strategies, that one of the things that we could maybe educate people about, if it's impossible right now to regain control of them, is regaining control and access to the public airwaves, which we entrust the Federal Communications Commission to regulate on our behalf, but it's not so effective, as we all know. And so for that very reason, the news and information that's of most concern and of most immediate importance to citizens just doesn't get out. Short of that, Al Krebs mentioned earlier the major farm publications, and I think that one of the most serious jobs before us is to debunk these major agribusiness-dominated farm publications, which lead everybody down the primrose path to expansion and going into greater debts.
That's very good.
Yeah.
My name is Jim Walters, and I just want to put in a quick plug for one of my favorite books, which is called Food First by Frances Moore Lappé and Joseph Collins. Frances Moore Lappé is the woman who wrote a very popular cookbook called Diet for a Small Planet. The reason that I would like to push this book is kind of in response to some things that were brought up about the international food situation. And this book, I would like to preface it by saying that I worked for 2 years in the mid-'60s in India in the Peace Corps, teaching farmers to adopt the Green Revolution. And I've subsequently gone back to visit the farmers I worked with and found that in spite of the Green Revolution, the rich are getting rich and the poor are getting poorer. And the situation has changed only marginally. And as a result of my work in India, I knew a great many things, and I had a great many suspicions about what was and was not working in India in regard to their food situation. And I went there, of course, believing that India was a country, a very poor country made up of starving millions. And it is a very poor country, and indeed there are people starving there. But the reasons that people are hungry in the third world is not because they don't have cultivable land. It's not because they don't have good farming skills. It's not any of these reasons. And the book, Food First, I think, for me, was a very clear, it brought so many things together and explained so many things that I knew and put them all really clearly in front of me and made me understand why there's hunger. And the reason that I want to bring this up is because I think it's a misperception that runs through, and I keep hearing it from participants in this conference, the thing about American farmers feeding the world. And a lot of American farmers believe this, and it comforts them, and they in their push for exports and bigger exports, it comforts them to feel that they're feeding the world. But I think if you take the time to read this book, you'll find out that it just ain't so. And I'm sure that anybody who's read it would second my remarks, but again, the book is called Food First by Frances Moore Lappé, and I hope that you'll all try to get a hold of that book.
I would like to know where Japan gets its food then to feed its millions. Where Japan gets its food.
Japan, I think, is kind of a unique situation.
There's many unique situations in the world.
Yeah, Japan's not poor, though.
No.
Japan has something to trade.
Japan is what we had to whip and rebuild, and they're one people that are whipping us right now. They're dumping their excess on us.
Okay, but we don't make any pretense that we're saving starving masses in Japan by our food exports.
No.
It's not food
There are
aid.
two other really timely one problem and one piece of legislation that I wanted to share with you. Before Congress now is the Reclamation Act, and the National Land for People and a number of other people are organizing support for that. There was a piece of legislation passed in 1902. I'm sure most people know about it. I don't want to go into it, but it's not being adhered to, and they're trying to make that stick and to make the changes that are necessary, and they need a lot of help, and they need pressure now. And I know that the National Land for People are now in Washington working out of the Rural America office. And the other area is the Emergency Land Fund. The Community Services Administration, which is the old Office of Economic Opportunity that started a lot of cooperative ventures and then pulled out, is trying to do it again. The Emergency Land Fund has been receiving, I don't know exactly how much money, I think about $300,000. And now the Community Services Administration is trying to reorient its funding priorities and say that we'll only fund groups that work in the CAP areas. Is that right, Peggy? Okay. And okay. The Emergency Land Fund is the group that Isaiah was talking about that he works with through the National Association of Landowners that's trying to work with the black landowners throughout the Southeast. And it's not just the Emergency Land Fund that will be affected by this change. It's many organizations that the Community Services Administration has been funding. And I just really encourage everybody to really write to them and to write to your local caps and to the national offices and just protest it. Yeah, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives is another organization that will be directly hit by this. No, are you talking about the FBI scandal? I don't know enough about it.
Don, did you have a comment about the local?
The Japanese situation is kind of interesting because the Japanese support their family farmers, wheat farmers, at $9 a bushel. Absolutely. So they bring our wheat in there, and if you want wheat in Japan, then you give the government wheat import board more than twice, or at least twice what they have to pay for it from us in the first place in order to get a bushel of wheat, all because they set their support price at that level in Japan. Europe does similarly, but not at as high a rate. And I want to say that Food First is available from American Agriculture Movement Publications, and we have our order forms out on the table out there if anybody would like a copy.
Thank you. Unless there are any burning other comments,
I have just one. It's real quick.
Okay. And then,
while everybody's plugging their bills and things like that, there's a bill tomorrow. And I have a telephone number. All you have to do is call. The only way you can do it is call. You have to write letters. You just have to put a dime in the telephone. And it's an energy bill. And I see a lot of people with anti-nukes and 3 Mile Island. And this would benefit nuclear and coal policy. So if you want to see me, I'll give you the phone number. Thank you. This is the Iowa bill.
You know, that just reminds me of one thing. I'm glad I don't get all the government I pay for.
okay, thank you. Marilyn's off in a meeting, so I think we should all clap for her. No one did that.
I'd like to announce about that party again. The party's at about 8 or 8:30 at that place upstairs, which is a bar down in the center of Ames on Main Street. On Main Street. So everybody come and have a good time. The name is That Place.
Where is it coming across in Illinois? It goes across at airport, Illinois City. Okay. Down to Wood River. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't done well Illinois as far as our organization. We have some membership down there, but it's not too small.
Why not to?
One basic thing, the public relations director of the Farm Bureau was contacted by the pipeline company, so to speak, in bedroom.
We have those kind of problems too. Although maybe on, I don't know, often on the county level, a lot of Farm Bureau people probably pretty supportive of what you're trying to do.
We only got one county that's really very strong, and that's Green.
Green?
Really strong.
Have you contacted Harold Dodd or any of those places? I'm not quite sure whether they have membership over there or not. I have to go look at my list of vice presidents and find out what counties are.
It was real ironic because Farm Bureau contacted us first.
Yeah.
Farm Bureau contacted us at the onset. We went down to, we met them. We met them at the airport, spent quite a lot of time. I had a deadline for everything. They took those copies of those and used them.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
So it was a bad deal. Well, we haven't worked. I haven't worked at it. I know that if we get some people down there and it would really go out and work.
Yeah, well, that's the problem we have too in terms of like just covering the states are damn big. We just can't cover enough of it quick enough.
We're solid. I'd say we probably have 90% of the effective land in the states of Iowa. So
that's great.
So we're good there.
Do you know whether now this is Northern Pipeline Company? Who are they? Who else do they belong to? Who belongs to them?
Coke Industries.
Okay. Are Are they going down to hook into, do you think they're going to, let me back this up a little bit. Is it natural gas, or are they going to be handling crude?
They're going to build a barge facility there at Wood River, barge up the Mississippi to Wood River. They also have access to other mid-continent systems, capital, Western capital.
A little duplication of systems they're putting in this line. What's the duplication? How does the area that they're trying to move the soil to now?
Being served now?
Right.
Well, originally, these